It's going to be an interesting night, and I say that in the fullest extent of may we live in interesting times. My statement going into this, before I turn over to Tom, is we are in the most interesting of times. We're in the time when words like artificial intelligence and ye shall be as gods mix in the same sentences. As Zoltan Istvan said, one of the most famous transhumanists, at the bottom line of all transhumanists, they simply don't want to die, and they want to live forever. Now, Zoltan Istvan is one of the smartest guys in the world. Tonight, Tom and I are going to take on artificial intelligence, the artificial intellect. And before I turn it immediately over to Tom, I want people to understand something. That Isaac Asimov, I think, 4 decades ago, basically had 3 laws of robotics. A robot may not injure a human being or through inaction allow a human being to come to harm. A robot must obey orders given by human beings except where such orders would conflict with the first law. A robot must protect its own existence as long as such protection does not conflict with the first or second law. And basically, that's outdated now because we've got war bots, we've got slaughter bots, we've got swarm bots, and the day that artificial intelligence is replaced by supernatural demonic intelligence of disembodied evil spirits that have sentience, they have self-awareness, they have a sense of history. They have a sense of their future doom, just as the demons that cried out of Jesus said, have you come to torment us before our time? They have an understanding of a time. And probably what is most interesting tonight as we get into this, and Tom, feel free to take your liberty and go as long as you need to go, and I'll do the same, but I won't, try and talk in any way. Well, I think we'll complement each other. And for the record, everyone, we have not talked before the show except to say, hey, February 8th, Doug, Tom and I have some pretty powerful stuff to share. Now, it was in July of last year that a humanoid robot named Han, developed by Hanson Robotics, reacts as the controller commands via mobile phone to make a facial expression during the Global Sources Spring Electronics Show. That can be predictable. But what wasn't predictable was Facebook's artificial intelligence robots shut down. They were shut down after they started talking to each other in their own language. In other words, they went beyond the parameters of their design, let's say this, input, even to the degree that the people programming both robots, which basically had 2 artificial intelligent robots talking, and they didn't understand, but Facebook abandoned the experiment after 2 of them and their intelligent programs appeared to be chatting to each other in a strange language only they understood. The 2 chatbots came to create their own changes to English that made it easier for them to work, but which remained mysterious to the humans that supposedly look after them. And with that, I will turn it over to Tom. In other words, unintended consequences are taking place in the field of artificial intelligence, in the field of what I would call breakaway programming and sentient programming that's rewriting its own commands. And Tom, what a privilege to be on with you tonight. And wow, the most important subject, I believe, in the world, that the world is facing, that we're talking about humankind's extinction-level technology and the inability of those to understand what's at stake. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, hey, great to be with you guys. You forgot one other thing to add to Asimov's list, and that's the rules for dating between sex bots and humans, but maybe we won't deal with that one tonight.
I want to deal with that one later. Go ahead.
Yeah, always a privilege to get to be on the air with you guys to discuss all the big things happening in our world and the ways that we hope that our different ministries can respond effectively as a resource, a guiding light to the masses. And of course, you started this off, Steve, talking about robotics and also the artificial AIs that created their own language, began communicating with one another. These breakout moments is going to come a point, I think, following what many call technological singularity, in which robots are going to begin communicating and making designs on humanity that won't be stoppable. They won't be able just to unplug it, because as Hugo de Garis, who's speaking at our conference in September, and who is ultimately qualified to discuss this issue, The point that he's made is at the moment that these things become an I am that I am, they become conscious, they're going to be literally trillions of times smarter, more powerful than every Einstein who has ever lived combined, and they will outwit any effort to try to stop their efforts. Of course, Hugo is not the utopian that Ray Kurzweil, guys like him say, oh no, they're going to fix every problem we've ever had, we're all going to get to live forever. Speaking of our September conference, it sounds like, if I heard Derek Gilbert's update a couple days ago correctly, it sounds like this is going to be another sellout long before the event even gets here, which happened last year, months ahead of the time, ahead of the gate. The thousands of tickets that were available sold out. Lots and lots of people were sorry they couldn't make it. And so I would just want to encourage people, and Steve's not paying me to say this, and I don't make any money off of it. So, but I'm really encouraging people, if you want to be there, if you want to be part of it, you need to go to Steve Quayle's website. Is it gen6.com? What is the web page for the conference, Steve?
I'm sorry, Tom, GENSIX.com/conference. And we want to encourage everybody. It's a matter of hotel rooms, because during that time, there is another event taking place. So last year, as you know, Tom, we had a lot of people actually complaining, and they were pretty discouraged. So we want to encourage everyone to go ahead and get their ticket quickly and make their hotel reservations. We've worked out special deals with the hotels. So that's why we had to start early in selling tickets, because that was the only weekend we had open in September that we could get to the mansion. So, ladies and gentlemen, again, go to gen6.com/conferences, or you just go to my website, stevequayle.com, and click on the top right-hand banner. But, Tom, this year is going to be, and it's kind of a pun, it's going to be probably one of the most unusual conferences. We've got Hugo de Garis, I would say this, based on everything I know, he's one of the top 3 minds in the world when it comes to artificial brain. He's on record as he hopes it doesn't turn out bad, but yet he's got this gnawing in his inner man that it is going to turn out bad. So unintended consequences, and I really hope people hear tonight with their hearts, because you and I have been doing what we've been doing apart from each other and collectively together, but now it's accelerating. And like I said in my opening paragraph, I don't think people understand. We hear about the successes. We do not hear about the failures, nor do we hear of the ramifications of even the church, Christians embracing transhumanism. So if you go ahead and address those, and like I said earlier, take your time, finish your thoughts. And ladies and gentlemen, this year Tom will be the final speaker, and there will be no screw-ups on timing. In other words, there is no limit, and Tom said, well, he can go 12 hours, but he can't go 24 hours straight. Just kidding.
Yeah, I can only do that when you and I are doing it together, Steve. But well, look, it's the number one gathering of its kind in the United States of America. And so again, I want to emphasize to people, do get the tickets early, because it is going to sell out. We already can see that happening. And you don't want to be among those who are disappointed that you didn't get to be there. It's the most critical conference really in the nation, I believe, because we're going to be talking not just about transhumanism as a philosophical, mind-meandering experiment. We're going to be talking about the actual technology and the ways in which human enhancement are leading even now, and are going to exponentially lead in the very near future, including starting later this year, to changing what it means permanently to be Homo sapien. And I want to get into some stuff. I want to talk about a conference that the Vatican recently hosted and where they came down on some of this. We'll get into that in a moment. But while we're on Hugo, let me explain to people, when we went to produce the documentary film Inhuman, which wound up winning 2 Telly Awards, and later tonight I'm going to tell you how you can get that from me free. But Hugo was like the number one guy that I wanted to be part of that documentary film. We have other world-famous transhumanists, pro-transhumanists, that are in that documentary, and then we have people that are conservative bioethicists like Wesley Smith and even members of the U.S. Council on Bioethics. And then we had some of the world's top leading theologians to kind of, talk about the ethics, the bioethics of transhumanism. But Hugo was the top guy that we wanted, and I can't tell you how thrilled I am. Hugo de Garis is not only a world-famous transhumanist. If you watch Ray Kurzweil's film Transcendent Man, Hugo's all inside that film too, because he offers the dystopian warnings that technological singularity, may not be the, win-all, end-all that guys like Kurzweil believe that it's going to be. Now, what qualifies him to be able to speak to this issue? He was, for the last 20-some years until recently, he was the leader of the Artificial Brain Development Laboratory at Xi'an University in China. And China, as most people are probably aware, is even ahead of the United States in the development of technology, so far as our intelligence tells us, in the fields of artificial intelligence and hacking and warfare and all that. Well, Hugo, while he was working for the Chinese government, he wrote a book called The Artilect War, Cosmos versus Terrans, a bitter controversy concerning whether humanity should build godlike, massively intelligent machines. So his subtitles are almost as long as the ones that I create for my books, right? But he sees this war that's coming, unfolding, due to exponential growth and development this century in genetics, robotics, artificial technology, nanotechnology, synthetic biology, and so on. And he's qualified to write about it because if you read his book, The Artilect Wars, he lays out his credentials. He kind of brags on himself, if you will. And he qualifies his authority to be able to speak to the issue of artificial brain development. But then in that book, it gets kind of scary. He's almost like reading an Old Testament prophet that's running from his calling, because he talks about how he gets these feelings of euphoria, and he's just so excited that we are so very, very close to the day in which conscious machines are going to come online. But then he'll go to bed with all of this excitement, and he says during the nighttime he has these horrific dreams in which he sees everybody that he loves, his family, everybody that he's ever known and cared about, literally drowning in a sea of blood. And he wakes up realizing that what we are working toward is just as likely to lead to what he calls a gigadeath war, in which literally billions of people are going to die in a very short period of time as a result of these smart, intelligent machines coming online. So, folks, when you come to the conference this year, you are going to have this guy is like in the top 5 in the world in terms of his qualifications to be able to speak to this issue, but to also be able to explain why he has a very, very bad feeling that this is all going to end poorly for the world. And it literally, he doesn't speak about this in terms of religious language or theology, but it literally sounds like he is describing the anti-human armies under the Antichrist slaughtering all of humanity at the end of time. It literally sounds like that's what he's describing.
Well, I think, too, Tom, that it's imperative that people understand this is the ultimate goal. You have basically fallen men, and fallen meaning obviously those who have rejected the God of the Bible, salvation through Jesus Christ, and have bought the lie that they shall know the knowledge of good and evil on a gazillion times, or, however, let's use the right word, a Googleplex multiple of what there will be available in the world knowledge, and it's spiritual knowledge. So it's interesting because Solomon had all the wisdom in the world. The Bible said that no man could stand against him, or there's no one would ever have the wisdom during his time or after. But the thing that's important to recognize is simply this, that Solomon's down downfall was when he got into the spiritual realm. So years ago, when you and I first started talking, Tom, I coined the term technolon, technological Babylon, and I said programming our extinction will be sold as almost an aphrodisiac for the mind. And beyond that, most people will see the purported benefits, but they will not see the sinister nature. And it would not be a surprise to me if the God of heaven himself is giving those kinds of dreams to these people, because the fact that he can even embrace that thought of a sea of blood killing off billions of people tells me that he still is open and he hasn't closed his mind totally, because there are people, as you know, ladies and gentlemen, and Tom's written about it, that simply want the end of mankind, and they want singularity. Obviously, Kurzweil is one of them. And what's fascinating about Kurzweil's book, Kurzweil spelled Kurzweil, he talks about spiritual machines. And so, Tom, you know, the fascinating thing is, just like, well, let me just address the sex bot thing in the context that you put it. We're now seeing, if people will just take it to 2 years down the line, maybe 3 years down the line, the alienation of the American female, pretty much it's the American female. It's not females all over the world. Maybe in the English world it is. And if you will, the vilification of the male. So now the sex bots, the sexual robots, are being designed to basically take the place. And Japan, by the way, has already embraced this to an extent that most people aren't aware. So the dating will be the parameters, and every day announcements are made of the advance and the sophistication. Now, I'm on record as saying that they will also be snuff bots. In essence, a programming in a sexual companion robot, either female or male, can be pre-programmed to basically genetically sense the, if you will, the genome in the person that's using their services, and should they not have the proper genetic code, basically waste them. Now, we heard last month that some of the new muscle tissue that they're going to put on these robots are 200 times stronger than human muscle tissue. So I got news for you. It kind of, this is probably one case where you don't want the big squeeze from the robot lover.
Well, and also, if it was the same article or some of the same writers who were saying that these robots, as they advance, persons could also hack in to your sex bot, because a lot of these are going to be connected to the internet, and they're using virtual reality scenes in which they're, two people in different parts of the world are pretending to have sex with one another using their sex bots. And somebody could hack into that and have these very powerful sex bots literally kill the person that is engaged with them. So, it's what's that HBO series right now, the remake of that old Western movie? Westworld, yeah, it's the possibility of a Westworld. Now, and I do want to talk here in a moment about how robots and humans will actually, in a nearer future than most people can even imagine, actually have biological offspring. I want to talk about how that's going to be possible, and that's going to be part of my presentation at the Branson Conference in September of this year, and I'm going to tie it to how I believe it could also play a role in the coming of Antichrist, things like that. Maybe we'll have time to talk a little bit about that tonight. But, so talking about Hugo de Garis being qualified to address the subject matter, although I'm not exactly sure what he's going to be talking about at the conference, but I assume it will probably be related to his, thesis. But according to the University of London, Steve Quayle and I are also qualified. And in fact, not only are we qualified, we're the leaders of what is called the milieu. We mentioned this a couple of months ago or 3 months ago on a Hagman report. Didn't really go into it. I'm not really going to go into it tonight, but I want people to just be aware of it. And if they want to email me, I'll send them the academic paper that that was published about us, and it was published in Zygon, the Journal of Religion and Science, which is a peer-reviewed science and religion journal, and it featured a piece that was written by a professor by the name of S. Jonathan O'Donnell from the Department of Religion and Philosophies at the University of London, and his article was titled "Secularizing Demons, Fundamentalist Navigations in Religion and Secularity." And by the way, if you request the article, I'll send it to you. And you'll just have to kind of put up with the fact that O'Donnell seems to be a guy that likes to hear himself use a lot of, as an old preacher friend of mine years ago used to call it 16-cylinder phraseology. But anyway, his aim in the paper was to explore, according to him, at a deeper level than his peers, what he called the anti-transhumanist apocalypticisms of our day, the central voices behind which he identifies as yours truly, Tom Horn and Steve Quayle, who he calls evangelical conspiracists and their milieu. Milieu, simply the old French word for a community or a gathering place. He determined that Steve and I are those who, working with our compatriots at Gen 6 and Skywatch TV, are the leaders of the transhumanist resistance that members of the transhumanist community had better pay attention to. And the peer-reviewed Zygon agreed with him, at least to the point that they found reason to promulgate his thesis. And it should also be noted that the Zygon is a prestigious quarterly peer-reviewed academic journal of religion and science that is actually sponsored by the Center for Advanced Study in Religion and Science. That is it's a large advisory group, if you will, that guides the development of curriculum and programs, study programs, and academic literature that is used to influence religious and scientific leaders on convictions by which people make their fundamental decisions. In other words, as their own website says, quote, thereby to revitalize and universalize the long-evolving wisdom and power inherent in the religious dimensions of culture, to sponsor and conduct meetings, conferences, seminars, and lecture programs to communicate the results of the Center for Advanced Study in Religion and Science activities through scholarly and popular journals, books, works on creative artists, mass media, so on and so on and so on. In other words, they exist to influence and guide through gradualism, slow progression. Indoctrination is a term I would probably use, the belief systems of religious people, so that they eventually will reject such conservatives as Tom Horn and Steve Quayle if they can be adequately demonized, and accept instead the transhumanist agenda that Steve and I would say are bringing back the days of Noah and the lies of the Nakash that men can be as gods, and that these modern Nephilim, despite what these academics might say, are not going to be our friends, right? And is an effort, I think, to undo humanity as it was in the days of Noah. By the way, in April, we're going to be releasing the book, The Milieu, Welcome to the Transhuman Resistance, and we'll be making that available at the conference this year, too. And it's got other members of the Milieu, other people that are named in the paper as being part of Steve and Tom's community. So according to some fairly heavy academic literature, Steve Quayle and I are also qualified to the point that the transhumanist community is actually being advised that they had better pay attention to us because we are a force to be reckoned with. That's not me and Steve bragging that. That's the University of London saying that.
Well, that's basically, in my opinion, that's basically the highest compliment can be paid. Because, the thing is that the evil that is going forth. Now, look at this. These guys can make statements like that, and they can call us whatever they want, but they are still programming on the old paradigm, and the highest expenditures of money going into this, Tom, are going into make killing machines that are autonomous. So they ought to basically change how do I say this tactfully? Well, I'm not going to be tactful. Hallelujah.
Since when have you been tactful, Steve?
Well, Gary Haven wrote that to me on the site of Jim Baker's one time, and I looked at it, and it was a foreign concept to me. But, the point being is that people have got to understand this. Now, Tom, you and I have become the enemies of the Christian transhumanists, too. And the Christian transhumanists are basically saying, because we're creating an image of God and his likeness, we can basically, where God might have overlooked something, what a dumb, and forgive me, these are my words, what a dumbass statement, okay, to make that claim about the King of Glory, but that they can improve upon God's design flaws. Well, God has no design flaws. Sin is what is producing the flaws. So, ladies and gentlemen, you can imagine 25 years ago, and Tom, how long have you and I been on the radio?
Well,
Together,
I don't know, man.
years?
It was all the way back in the shortwave radio age.
Okay, so that's got to be mid-90s, okay? And that means we're not getting any younger, but here's the thing. Most of the stuff we were warning about, and to those who would say we're fear-mongers or we're fear porn, I better tell you this. You better take a good look at the words of Jesus in Matthew 24, Luke 21, and see what's interesting, isn't it? They can't even attack our arguments based on their own presentation of the world, but they can and do attack the faith. How dare anybody believe in the primitive God? And what we're trying to say, people, is rise up. We're trying to say wise up, stand up, fight against it. So being called the leader of the transhumanist resistance, well, what a bunch of squirrels coming out of hibernation early and embracing all the nuts within their own, if you will, secularized, God-hating world.
No. Well, and again, it's not just me and you raising concerns about the issues. You do have agnostics, people like Hugo de Guerra saying exactly the same thing. You have the intelligence agencies of the United States government right now. I'm almost wore out with running the headlines at Skywatch TV, in which, this department or that department, the Department of Defense, some intelligence agency for the U.S. government, warning that Russia and China are racing forward with their enhanced human operations, EHOs, and that it terrifies the brass at the Pentagon, and that the United States, which I don't buy this part of it, but they're saying that they're reluctant, they don't want to get into a new Cold War, if you will, a race for the development of armament, but this time around actually based on enhanced human operation, EHOs, which involve modifying the body, the brain, genetics, super soldiers is part of it, but something that goes even beyond that, I think that's prophetic. There was a press conference not long ago where the Defense Department, their future research and development strategy department, the guy's name was Bob Work, if people want to look that up. He's a deputy defense secretary, warning that America was going to lose its military competitive advantage if it doesn't pursue technologies such as employing artificial intelligence, brain-machine interfacing, cyborging humans, and the genetic alteration of humans. Altering human beings from the inside out to be more effective war fighters, and so on. But those ethical concerns don't apply to authoritarian governments like Russia or China. They're not going to have any restraint, lack or hesitation in developing EHOs, and that's the reason why the Pentagon was saying that it was terrifying to them. So we're definitely pushing forward with things that the public is aware of, exoskeletons, Terminator-like technology, brain chemistry, altering drugs, vaccines, interfacing with artificial intelligence systems. And I saw another article yesterday talking about how will strong artificial intelligence actually come online? And this is something I actually wrote about in one of my books before we even talk about it in the documentary Inhuman, that this will happen through cyborgization. What do I mean by that? By joining artificial intelligence with a human brain, the AI will learn from the human brain how to develop consciousness. You might even have a system that is both part a human brain and an AI system that coordinate together to create an artificial intelligence that begins to believe that it is an I am that I am. But all of this stuff is on the drawing board right now. Bioenhanced humans with cognitive abilities that are in the design budgets, they're on the drawing board. If you were to take this year's DARPA-approved military budget and look at it, there are dozens of lines in there where literally, and this is the part they admit to, hundreds of millions of dollars. You and I know that in special access project budgets, it's in the billions of dollars and has been for a long time, for actually rewriting the genetic makeup of warfighters, of soldiers for the battlefield. Some of this is happening right now. So it's not just Tom Horn and Steve Quayle. It's the U.S. military. It's the top transhumanist scientists in the world, bioethicists. Everybody knows that this is happening, and that's what makes the conference this year. It's what makes the book, the milieu. It's what makes all of this so timely. The part to me that is a real challenge, Steve, is I will notice, like in our social media, I will notice that when we run an article on like Christian transhumanism or on advances in biotech that affect what it means to be a human, things like that. When we run those articles, the numbers of people that will share those articles or that care about it in the Christian communities is far lower than when we run some of the other articles that might be, I don't know, headline grabbers or more salacious or whatever. That's fine. I'm not picking on anybody, but it does concern me that the church in general, the church as a community, I'm not talking about denominationalism, the church in general seems to be completely unaware of how quickly everything now is exponentially advancing all around us. And because they're either unaware by choice or somehow they've been just, dulled down to the point that they're not paying attention anymore. This is allowing for the advancement of transhumanist ideologies, including, by the way, at the Vatican. And again, if we get time tonight, I want to talk about the Vatican's recent Pontifical Council for Culture in their plenary, in which they dealt with this very issue, the modification of humans using technology and what does it mean for the future of the church. People will be able to, after I talk about it, people can Google it and read this stuff for themselves. It's some pretty concerning stuff, pretty scary. And it does mean that maybe the more conservative Protestant or evangelical communities are allowing the game to be defined without our involvement. So the timing of our conference is great, and I sure hope and pray that God will use it to wake some people up.
And I believe that's for such a time as this. The interesting thing about the conference, I can tell people this, they will see things in perspective. Obviously, we're going to have a 12-foot life-size giant built on the actual dimensions of the conquistadors and their chroniclers and others. I mean, I've only spent 44 years on this, Tom, and there are some big dudes in history. Obviously, we put up the skull. And how this relates to transhumanism is really simple. There is a supernatural force guiding the technology of fallen humanity. It's kind of like people think fallen angels, I'm talking defining those that left their first estate. In other words, they rebelled with Lucifer. 1/3 of the angels fell. I don't think people realize those aren't ignorant entities. You can read the book of Enoch. You can read the book of Giants. There's so many, not only extra, quote, biblical texts, but history itself. And the technology that they have presented, a higher form of killing. Well, ladies and gentlemen, when you understand technology and you understand the spiritual ramifications. Listen, Tom, you're a former pastor. You're a tremendous researcher. This isn't flattery, and you're also a very articulate man. I said, ladies and gentlemen, I mean this. I wish I could communicate, and probably so does everybody listening to the show tonight, as clearly as Tom. But where I have been able to see where this stuff leads, and where it leads is when God's word said, "My people are destroyed for knowledge, not because they don't have the knowledge, but they reject it." What scares me, Tom, if you said, Steve, what is the most disconcerting issue that you see facing that which calls itself by the name of Jesus Christ Christian? Most of those people don't even believe Jesus is who he is or that God is who he is. But the point being is that it's their destruction. And it's kind of like the statement, they will accept the technology that at its root is going to produce the fruit of their destruction. Let me read one thing from Kurzweil's book, The Age of Spiritual Machines. He said, further he asserts in a sort of swirling postulate, time speeds up as order increases and vice versa. He probably wouldn't admit to quoting Jesus there, but Jesus talked about the days being shortened for the elect's sake, or there be no flesh left alive. Now, he calls this the law of time and chaos, and it means that although entropy is slowing the stream of time down for the universe overall, and thus vastly increasing the amount of time between major events, in eddy of technological evolution, the exact opposite is happening, and events will soon be coming faster and more furiously. Well, obviously we know this, and he goes on to say that, he's worried because he says, what Zoltan Eastman says, is they'll soon not only be able to beat us at chess, but also likely demand civil rights and might at least realize the very human dream of immortality. Well, again, ye shall be as gods. And when you're talking about the whole idea that there is a group out there, now, you and I talked about this years ago. What year did you write Blood on the Altar?
It's been about 4 years ago now.
Okay, 3 or 4 years ago. And what I'm seeing already is, in essence, those of us who were forward-thinking, obviously, you know how many books you've got out under your name, me too. I mean, together it's got to be close to, 24, approaching 30 at least. And we've footnoted, we've documented it. In essence, we have had, by the grace of God, our feet shod with the preparation of the gospel of peace. The technology that these people are projecting, there's what I would call the kindergarten guys. They just look at, and who isn't in favor of prosthesis, artificial eyes to those who are blind, anything that can help a human being, achieve the life that God intended for him, I'm all for. But what I'm not for is the hidden contempt that now is expressing itself, and it's everybody wants to live forever. Now, somebody asked me, is there a limit to intelligence? Based on the Word of God, I see no limit to the end of depravity of fallen angels and their technological decadence, that until Jesus puts an end to it. But in the meantime, I believe that there's going to be a lot of blood on the altar, because Jesus said there'll come a time when they'll kill us believing they're doing God a favor. So when they identify and state that God is ultimately a construct, that basically an advanced civilization created God who created us, he used the alien sperm, panspermia, the whole thing that we've talked about, Tom, you've written about in your books on the Vatican, even the whole thing, we don't have to re-hit that, but, probably this is a good time, if you feel is, and, I never want to take you on one of my rabbit trails, but the point being is that the Catholics, and I pray that every Catholic listening to this will understand this, they are going to abrogate everything that the early church fathers and the doctrines of the Catholic faith, as far as who Jesus is, who God is, they're going to abrogate that in favor of the alien Savior. So in the transhumanist Vatican intercourse, and boy, could I go on from that, but the point is I won't. The thing is that where are they now, based on the latest information you have on the embracing of transhumanism and the alien card? And if you want to, share, maybe we go into hour 2 on that, just how you see those two interrelated.
Yeah, well, I'll start on it right now. We'll see what happens in hour two. I assume we're going to take a break at the top of the hour, which is in like 20 minutes or so from now.
Yes, we will.
And look, so this was in November. So it's just 3 months ago now, 2017. The Vatican, their Pontifical Council, their high intelligence for culture, they hosted what they call a plenary, an assembly on the future of humanity, new challenges to anthropology. So Google that, people. The future of humanity, new challenges to anthropology. And note how they included all these top-level scientists and cardinals, as well as bishops from around the world. This was a conference that deliberated on changing attitudes toward using new and emerging fields of science, gene editing, robotics, artificial intelligence, neuroscience, brain-machine interfacing, all these powerful new technologies to modify what it means to be a human. And oddly enough, Steve, they actually also, and I'll explain how in a moment, they actually also did connect this to the idea of aliens. So you're going to get a twofer. I'm going to explain both things that you just asked me about at the outset of this council, where they stated, and I'm just reading this now from the website, the general aim of the plenary is to open up a dialogue about the future of humanity, end quote. And I read the entire report. I read everything about it. I listened to some of the presentations, all these topics. They're discussing issues raised over what interdisciplinary approach might help the church, the Catholic Church, avoid what they called a technocratic paradigm, which makes the method and aims of science and technology the exclusive epistemological paradigm that shapes the lives of individuals and the workings of society. I'm still quoting. Such a paradigm generates a reductionist or unidimensional approach to life and needs to be complemented with the insights of other forms of wisdom. This implies a cultural approach that could foster a distinctive way of looking at things, a way of thinking, policies, an educational program, a lifestyle, and spirituality. Anyway, people can read the website for themselves, and I'll quote a couple other things here in a moment. You can Google and read all the discussions, and you'll find that it was a very pro-transhumanist approach. And I'm not being critical here. I'm not,
Tom, if I can interject one thing. I got a ton of emails about this from what you had reported on. And I just want to say this is a real hot button issue. Not that you didn't know that already, but I just want to tell you that I got a lot of feedback on this. But go ahead, sir.
Well, I'm glad that people are sending you questions and asking questions. That's what they need to do, and they certainly ought to be asking questions about this, including Roman Catholics who are being represented by the the intelligentsia of their organization, who are right now putting together the guidelines, the interdisciplinary guidelines that are going to be used for basically making both theology and policy that will be promulgated by the most powerful Christian organization in the world, the Roman Catholic Church, the Vatican, the largest, of its kind. And that church is unlike other denominations. The Assemblies of God, the Baptists, the whatever, they don't have the intergovernmental reach and policy influence that the Roman Catholic Church does to influence the ethics around these kind of issues. Now, you have to give the Roman Catholic Church credit for being at the forefront of the pro-life movement and things like that, where much of evangelical Christianity has been slothful. But it's very concerning, the other side of the shoe, if you will, is very concerning to go and read the plenary where you have the Pontifical Academy and all of the leaders of Roman Catholicism, the guys that write their doctrine, gathering together, and the stuff that they were saying there, which was universally agreed upon. Very, very, very spooky stuff when they're talking about how transhumanism could be compatible with traditional Christian philosophy and theology. And they talk about how we need a universally accepted model for nature or creation, they say, because right now we don't have one that is agreed upon. This is all their own language, not by churchmen, not by philosophers, not by scientists. We don't have an accepted model for nature or creation. That's some really spooky, loaded language, ladies and gentlemen. And then they go on to talk about the vision of mankind redesigned through applied sciences is one that the church has got to address and learn how to be compatible with where technology is taking us. And so they even, by the way, they even raised questions, Steve, in there about speciation. Speciation. What does it mean to be a species as opposed to another species? And can these lines be blurred? And would that be something that could be acceptable among the so-called Christian transhumanists? Whether modified humans would still be considered to be Homo sapiens, and even if not, still, do they have a soul? Can they be redeemed? Listen, you know, a moment ago, Steve, you mentioned, the book of Enoch, the book of Jubilees. The hybrid age that we're talking about right now is something that happened once before. When Jesus in Matthew 24 says, as it was in the days of Noah, he's talking about when there was once a hybrid age, there is going to, at the end times, be another hybrid age that will be similar, in which humanity, as it was designed by God, will be corrupted, and so will animals and life, all of which we're seeing happening all over the world right now. Transgenic food, genetically modified organisms, human-animal chimeras, not just at the embryonic level, by the way, now being promoted by the Chinese government and others to be raised to full maturity for the purposes of harvesting organs, xenotransplantation. So that's what this plenary was all about. Basically what they were saying, and I applaud them for this, because they're asking a question that I sure wish the evangelical and Protestant community was asking. They're coming together in a council. They're asking the question, what are we going to do with the fact that we have entered into the hybrid age? And whether we like it or not, this is going to happen. And how should churchmen and theologians and the Vatican, how do we handle this? What is our responsibility as bishops and priests and so on to people of the near future who are only part human in the sense that has been traditionally or historically understood? What are the inequalities that could develop between enhanced and unenhanced entities, and so on? And by the way, the reason I brought up, Steve, what you said a moment ago about the book of Enoch was because that was the very question that Enoch was presented with. The watchers, we've created these entities. We're not sure if they have a soul. Can you go to God and ask God if he'll forgive us and redeem our offspring? And God tells Enoch, go back and tell them, no, what you have made is unrepairable. It is irredeemable. It is forever confined to the darkness of outer darkness. And for doing it, you yourselves are also going to be constrained in everlasting chains of judgment, awaiting the day that you're going to be cast into a lake burning with fire and brimstone. There is no redemption for what you have done. And so now you have the most powerful Christian organization in the world coming together, essentially asking the same question. Will they have a soul? Can they be redeemed? And they very much are leaning towards, yeah, we don't like it. Maybe, on the other hand, maybe it's cool. Maybe we all get enhanced and it's a way of improving humanity. Let's see, we got another 5 or 10 minutes here. Let me bring this to this other part where this, in their conference, is also tied to the idea of aliens. And this was of interest to me because as soon as I saw the plenary being, there was some opinion pieces written by Catholics, by the way, discussing this. The question that went through my mind was, what is the guiding worldview that perhaps is steering the Vatican attendees on these heady matters, these heady questions. I had a serious reservation because I became aware that during the assembly, the council had unanimously approved a petition to be sent to Pope Francis, Petrus Romanus, requesting that the monatum, now if a person doesn't know what a monatum is in Roman Catholicism, this is a warning that is issued by the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith against a cleric whose teachings they believe could inspire heresy, right? So a monatum, a warning that these teachings could lead to heresy, was originally filed against Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, who we've talked about before. And Chris Putnam and I were interviewed by Steve Quayle. I think it was on the Hagman show here a few years ago while Chris was still alive, when we put out the book Exo Vaticana. And we wrote a whole chapter on Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. But anyway, it was unanimously approved during the plenary for the modification of humanity that the warning, the monatum, against Chardin be removed. Unanimously, they made an appeal to the Pope, the Council. And in fact, there's quite a bit about this online now. During the Council, they discussed how what they called the seminal thoughts of the Jesuit Father Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, anthropologist and eminent spiritual thinker, had influenced their consideration throughout the meeting. So when I went looking for what is the deeper guiding worldview that is steering the Vatican attendees on this event that ultimately is also going to influence, the theology and so forth that comes out of the Vatican and out of their universities, and that is disseminated then through their bishops and so on down to the church people, that they had used Chardin, who, when Benedict was Pope, he had made explicit references to Benedict, and by the way, the members of this assembly pointed that out. They when they sent their letter to Francis asking him if they would remove the monatum against Chardin, they said Pope Benedict wrote things in praise of his teachings. Pope Francis himself has also made explicit references to his work since he became the Pope. You could Google this too. There was an associate editor of the Jesuit Review. He's an American Vatican correspondent by the name of Gerald O'Connell. He wrote about this event, and I got his quote right in front of me. He says, quote, they concluded the conference by expressing their conviction that this act, that is, removing the monatum against Chardin, not only will acknowledge the genuine effort of the pious Jesuit to reconcile the scientific vision of the universe with, listen to this, Steve, Christian eschatology, but will represent a formidable stimulus for all philosophers and theologians and scientists of goodwill to cooperate towards a Christian anthropological model that fits naturally in the wonderful warp and weft of the cosmos. Now, what in the world do they mean by all that? I guess we'll have to talk about it when we come back after the break. But if you understand the teachings of Chardin, who believe that in essence we're all growing up through an evolutionary model that eventually will reach the omega point, where we too are going to be part of a singularity. We're then going to join our alien brotherhood, and all become part of a wonderful communion with God.
Well, one of the reasons why the True Legends Conference this year, September 14th through the 16th in Branson, Missouri, is so important is because, again, all of us who have been kind of leading the way, by the way, there's going to be a whole group of young people there from the Fall brothers who work for Tom. Obviously, Tom understands the necessity of reproducing his ministry. I do. And so we're really inviting everybody. My definition of young is anybody under 40, okay? And what's important is we pass on what we've learned, and so we're excited to invite everybody. And I got to share something. Again, because of the events taking place at Branson the week leading up to us and the week after us, hotel rooms are there's a limit to how many are in the whole town. So the lady that has arranged this for us at the mansion, Christy, has basically, done a wonderful job for us, but we will sell out, my guess is, in the next 60 days at this rate. So please, ladies and gentlemen, understand, we're so focused on this that I promise you this, and Tommy, is this not a fair statement? They will hear things they've never heard before, and they will see things they've never heard before, and this time it will be show and tell. And by that I mean there has never been, and who knows what would happen to your following if God grants us grace. But the point being, this is the key. And as someone who's been ahead of the curve, no matter who says what about me, they weren't around talking about transhumanism and sex bots 25 years ago, okay? They couldn't even imagine it. Then in my book, Xenogenesis, and this is a pitch for that book, I would say this: if people are interested in it, they really need to get a copy of it, because I talk about, quoting scientists, that even the realm of sex bots are talking about, some of the most crazy stuff you could even imagine. But more than that, it is talking about everything that we're talking and bringing forth to the people. And today's technology, tomorrow's monsters. I think people need to put something into perspective. Tom Horn just brought up the days of Noah. And what's critical is that most people do not understand the principle of God's love for the righteous and wrath for the wicked. So when God told Abraham that he was going to destroy the people of Sodom for their wickedness, Abraham pleaded for mercy upon them, and he stated the principle: shall not the judge of all the earth do right? Genesis 18:25. But the bottom line is the Christians have got to not buy the lie of the guys in Oxford that, quite candidly, they are the destroyers. Those are my words. In my opinion, those who buy on to the Oxfordian attack on Tom and I and others, they are the destroyers, because they're saying, just go quietly into the night. This is going to be good for you. The three things people must recognize who are Christians. Number one, God is perfect. God is sovereign, and God has chosen to be merciful to sinners through his Son, Jesus Christ. Nothing that is a hybrid and after another kind is subject to redemption, because God makes it very clear we are the seed of Adam. These guys might want to be Adam too, but they're not creating the image and likeness of the Lord Jesus Christ. Romans 5, 6, and 8 says that Jesus died for the ungodly. And it's interesting to me, Tom, that that the new birth that Christians should be rejoicing in, they are trading, they are whoring, they are giving away, they are intellectually committing spiritual whoredom to claim that God didn't do a good enough job, and that they themselves, deep down, may be saying the same thing that Zoltan Eastman, I think, honestly detailed, that transhumanists seek to live forever, and they seek to live forever on their terms. So, please go on to where the top of the hour interrupted you, because this is critical. And what you're saying about the entire Catholic position on aliens and everything, they are totally abrogating the Word of God. There is nothing in their doctrine, nothing in their current dogma of talking about baptizing aliens and then dealing with transhumanism. The easiest way to deal with it is on the Word of God, but they will not do that. So go ahead, Tom.
Well, I'll try to be quick, too, because I also still do want to eventually get back over to the idea of, I use the term sex bot tongue-in-cheek, but I really want to talk about the possibility of giving life to a synthetic form that's the offspring of literal DNA as created by a robotic mind and integrated with humans. So we'll see if I can do all this quick enough to get back there. Before the break, I was talking about the plenary by the Vatican's Pontifical Council on the future of humanity with regard to transformative and enhancement technologies that are going to soon change our understanding of Homo sapiens, which is coming at us like a Mack truck right now. And what had concerned me was the revelation that Pierre Chardin had been universally acknowledged as the guiding light, the most approved world view, guiding the people that were in attendance that day. Now, why does that concern me? Because, well, for a couple of things, most Protestant and evangelical leaders are really uninformed on the goals of transhumanism. And maybe that's by intention. Maybe they've just been successfully rocked to sleep and they're unaware. I don't know. But either way, they're leaving it to groups like the Vatican to define Christian eschatology. Did you notice that's actually on the plenary website where they're talking about, eschatology, the study of end times events, the future of humanity, and they're combining it with Chardin's teachings and their idea that Chardin provides the guiding light for the kind of eschatology that should be embraced, the study of end times, the ultimate destiny of humanity combined with human modifying technology, and the transhuman worldview of Chardin to define the future of humanity. Well, anyway, to me it was eyebrow-raising. I'll try to just say what I want to say about this quickly because I'm probably going to wind up putting an entire chapter in the new book, The Milieu. I love saying that, by the way. An Okie trying to speak French. It's got a ring.
Yeah, and I would say the milieu, intellectual madness. I'd attenuate that because I think most people think it's a cow with a Missouri accent. Milieu. It's what cows do in the field. I just had to throw that in, Tom.
Yeah, I agree. Well, anyway, but yeah, it was eyebrow-raising for me. Anybody can do the same thing I did. Go and read everything that was published in all the papers and watch some of the, if they're still online, watch some of the presentations that were made there, and the fact that to a man, they asked Pope Francis to remove the warning against Chardin and to view it as, the guiding light for, determining what should the position of the church be with regard to the transformation of humanity from Homo sapien to something else. Now, a lot of people may not know, Chardin actually wrote years ago his own, it was called Divine Milieu, the Divine Milieu, and it was translated into English in 1960 if people want to read it on Google Books or something like that, Chardin's Divine Milieu. Widely considered to be one of the first to positively articulate a transhumanist worldview in which mankind is going to take control of its evolution. And during a technological singularity, everybody gives Chardin credit for saying this long before Kurzweil did in his Age of Spiritual Machines. He said we would reach a technological singularity in which we would transcend our status as humans and become part of a higher cosmic intelligence. Pierre, by the way, was a Jesuit, like the people that attended the plenary. He was a mystical philosopher, and he wrote renowned works, renowned today, for his devotion to Darwinism. And in fact, his devotion to Darwinism was what partly originally created the article against him, where some of the priests were concerned it could lead to, dangers of theology. But he was the one that conceived of the idea that evolution was progressing to a goal, the maximum level of complexity in consciousness, which he called the omega point. And again, people can Google omega point, read all about it. You'll get the idea, the concept of the new sphere, all these terms that basically said we are moving towards a moment in time in which mankind, it will reach the omega point. We will become one with a technological singularity We will develop Christ consciousness, which sounds like an occult phrase, another reason that he was at first charged against. And we will become one with the universe. But he also talked about alien life on other worlds, and how our consciousness will merge with their consciousness. If people want to read the whole chapter about it, it's in the Exo Vaticana. I can send people information, even just copy the chapter out of the book and send it to them. Because I want to get on to another point here. But I do plan to write a whole chapter on this in the book, The Melu. Suffice to say tonight that evangelicals had better wake up and smell the transhuman hybrid coffee while they can, because right now they're leaving the terms to be defined by other organizations that certainly don't have what I would consider to be a conservative bioethical approach to this subject matter. Now, the other thing that, before we run out of time tonight, if I can, I really wanted to talk about, and this is going to be part of the presentation, that I'm going to make in Branson this year, and it's the question of whether artificial intelligence is going to give birth to the living image of the beast, or even something more exotic, and or both maybe, the soulless armies of the Antichrist. Now, where am I coming from? At the end of the year, last year, there was a world-renowned AI expert by the name of Dr. David Levy. He gave a Christmas lecture to all robot lovers of the world at the Third International Congress on Love and Sex with Robots. And he announced that human-robot offspring is going to be possible in the very near future. Very near by meaning essentially this year, next year, very near. And it means what it sounds like, too, by the way, that one parent is going to be human, even if they're an enhanced one, but still partly some part human. The other parent is going to be wholly machine. And believe it or not, there is technology under development at this very moment that's going to take this idea from sci-fi to reality. I'm going to give, like I say, I hope to give a full presentation on this with illustrations, examples, the whole thing. Not the examples of robots and people having love.
I'll deal with that.
Now, how would it work, and why do I think that it's prophetic?
Yep.
So, until now, in order to, or at least until the 1970s, in order for a baby human traditionally to be born, you had to have a female egg, had to be fertilized by a male sperm. Then in the 70s, we moved beyond sexual intercourse and into the revolution of in vitro fertilization, in which a baby could be conceived. In vitro means in glass. It could be conceived in a test tube in a laboratory, but it still required a human female's egg and a human male's sperm. Now, within the last few years, scientists have discovered that both the sperm and the egg can be created in a laboratory from skin cells. So you no longer need a man or a woman. This can all be created from skin cells. Mature adult cells can be reprogrammed to become immature, what they call pluripotent cells, that can turn into any other type of tissue or cell. But now, in the last 18 months, we've moved past that. Additional research has led to the discovery that eggs don't have to be fertilized at all. Eggs can be tricked into developing into an embryo without fertilization. It's actually called parthenogenesis, which, as you know, Steve, comes from parthenogenesis, the idea of virgin birth.
Right.
And that technology would now allow for two females or two males, for example, who could literally just go in and offer skin samples. Doesn't have to be eggs, don't have to be sperm. Just go in and offer skin samples, and a child can be born entirely from the laboratory, producing a literal biological offspring of two female parents or two male parents and so on. Now, the ethics religious questions regarding the artificial embryos created in such a way right now are what is against the technology. And I would assume during the Trump presidency that maybe those restrictions will still be guided by like his faith counselor or whatever. Maybe not. But that's what right now is keeping the technology from being fully embraced. But the technology exists. And it really is only a matter of time and red tape now before it's allowed, likely starting late this year, early next year. But the point is, all that's needed now to make human babies is DNA. Now, again, when I say DNA, people think, okay, well, that has to originate from a man or a woman, even if it's their skin cells, it's what God made. Not true anymore. All that's required to make human robot babies in the very near future is the integration of human DNA and robot DNA. Now, what am I talking about? Again, David Levy, he's the expert in this field. He was recently interviewed in which he admitted, and I'm quoting now, you can look this up on Google and read it for yourself, quote, these robot chromosomes will be a set of computerized DNA code for creating artificial creatures that can have their own personality based on established biological inheritance laws, end quote. He goes on to describe the genetic codes being broke down into two categories, which he calls personality and outward. And as the title suggests, personality, or what I would call genotype coding, is what will provide the genetic information that guides the specific internal makeup of the entity, while the outward, or what I would call phenotype coding, will determine the way the robot, the child, human, looks, acts, and this would include even minute details like hair color, eye color, personality, and so on. Now, for people listening to this tonight that think Tom Horn just fell off the deep end, remember, actually the first major milestone allowing for robots or computer minds, if you prefer, to write hitherto unknown genetic coding and to give birth to first ever synthetic life forms was actually achieved in 2016 in the landmark experiments of Craig Venter, the pioneering U.S. geneticist behind the dawn of a new era in which life is made literally by allowing computers to write genetic code. And remember, at the time, Julian Savulescu, in fact, Steve, you and I talked about this at the time, and probably again on the Hagman report because they're the ones that are at the front of all this stuff. He's this professor of practical ethics at Oxford University. He was the one that said Venter is creaking open the most profound door in humanity's history, potentially peeking into its destiny. He said he is not merely copying life artificially or modifying it radically by genetic engineering. He is going to the role of a god, creating artificial life that could never have existed normally. That's an exact quote. In other words, exactly what happened in the days of Noah and that Jesus connected to the arrival of Antichrist, except the current scientists now foresee a near future. We're going to be dealing with all of this at the conference, in which the ancient attempt to corrupt all flesh is going to look like kindergartners at play by comparison. We are literally now forecasting a brave new world in which, did you see the headlines there a couple weeks ago, Steve, of automated robot chemists running synthesizer farms where modified life forms will be churned out 24 hours a day. Did you see that?
Yes, I did.
And the spooky thing about that is, again, this isn't a sci-fi. This isn't a novel that somebody was pitching. This is technology that exists right now today. We're not even waiting for hurdles to be passed. The technology is in place. It really now is just a matter of when will the major governments of the world allow for such automation. And what the Pentagon and the Department of Defense and so on here in the United States is saying is Russia isn't waiting. China isn't waiting. They're already doing this. And the spokesman for the Pentagon said it scares the bleep out of us. But they know it's happening right now. So the big question, and this is what I'm hopefully going to be dealing with both in the new book, The Milieu, and also at the Branson Conference this year, is will transhuman science use this technology now to give birth to something even more wicked, and that is the Antichrist or his image? And is it actually, is it coming together right now? Is it being designed right now? Because a lot has developed since Venter's breakthrough. Science has marched relentlessly forward from these novel organisms that he created in 2016 that were undesigned by God. Now we've moved to science that will allow for the arrival of what. And by the way, what are we talking about here? The reason I refer to this as perhaps the armies of Antichrist is, regardless of what the Vatican plenary said, in terms of these artificial life forms having a soul or not having a soul, and the church's responsibility to reach out to them as such and so on, what are we talking about? These modern children of the gods. Because I know what the book of Enoch says, they weren't redeemable. These are something guided by, if they either have no soul or a synthetic spirit,
or how about demons?
Or possessed by something else that is ancient, right. The first fruits of Revelation 13. Something created not in God's image, but in the image of the Antichrist, the image of Lucifer, the image of Satan. Is that what we're talking about?
Yes. Yes, unequivocally yes. Because again, if a third of the angels rebelled and their offspring, no one, and you know, I can't tell people how many giants there were, the Rephaim, but I can say this, that when those entities die, the giants, their evil spirit, which is half human, half fallen angel, became the evil spirits on the earth, both the book of Giants and the book of Enoch. And don't go telling me, ladies and gentlemen, well, that's not in the Bible. Both Peter and Jude, and there's a fight on that, because if you acknowledge that spiritual conflict was based, number one, on rebellion, number two, on probably, you know, one of the most powerful beings in the universe created by God to lead the worship of God, and then all technology is the devil's attempt to provide omniscience, omnipresence, and omnipotence, all of that. So, you know, here's something I think people need to understand, Tom. If you want to, and I wrote this in my book, okay, Xenogenesis, and I would say to people, if you don't know what we're talking about, the book I wrote on Xenogenesis, here's why it's critical. First of all, I laid this out. The person of Noah, we're talking about the days of Noah, he bridged three important times in history. Number one, he connects a time before and after the very final judgment on all of humanity for their sins, and only a select few escaped the destruction. Number two, also he lived at a time when the genetic purity of the human race was under attack. He lived at the time where the mighty men of renown, the mighty men of old, who were very powerful, lived. Human beings live very long lives, sometimes hundreds of years in life. How about Methuselah, 969 years old? The culture of that day had become corrupt and evil. And listen to this, Noah lived in a time when everyone probably spoke the same language. Well, we know they did up until Babylon, and the point is that now universal translator. So the same knowledge is going to be imparted, given to all of the enhanced and updated brains. Now listen to this. Here's the critical thing. And then, ladies and gentlemen, please, if you can't handle this, pray about this. I'm serious. Noah's time had a different atmosphere in which amazing sights like the rainbow had not yet appeared. Tom, in the years that I was associated with some very bright guys who are only referred to in you know, whispers in the black ops, above most military knowledge, above compartmentalized intelligence, majestic and the magi, they told me that the bottom line is the entire geoengineering and atmospheric manipulation is to bring it back to the days of Noah. And I don't know if you, Tom, could say the most important single point you've ever presented to the public in the last 10, 15 years of anything you wrote. I would say in my world it is when you brought to my attention, God quickened it to me, the gates of hell opening. But what was the most significant point, and Doug, you took part in this because you wrote one of the first chapters for my book, Xenogenesis, and I quoted you and I gave you attribution, a box of chocolates. But this is interesting. Chapter 13 was the deathbed confession of a former Illuminist, high-ranking intelligence figure going into the very statements on the geoengineering and geoatmospheric destruction in order to allow those entities that were destroyed in the flood to reanimate in bodies. And what is now, we're seeing everything is, quote, carboniferous life forms, nanotubes, carbon nanotubes. We're seeing, if you will, a body or bodies, robotic / manipulated genotypes that the evil spirits are going to come in and possess, inhabit, and empower. So again, the thing, I think this is my sticking point with a lot of people. We're not talking about artificial intelligence as you just take A and B, add C, throw in a little D, make sure you put in plenty of E, F, and G. Oh, can I go there? And the deal is that you basically, it's beyond just the composition of elements. The very thing that God created in humanity when he breathed into Adam and Adam's descendants, the breath of life, that breath coupled with the body, and now that breath, that hybrid spirit, everything that God did, he said he saw everything God created was good after its kind. So ladies and gentlemen, please, I'm telling you, the most important thing I know of writing, and obviously, again, Tom, I was on record a long time ago. You know how many people thought I was crazy, still do. But even the people identifying us as the transhumanist resistance, they have got to, and they do realize that we are appealing to the spirit of men, not just the intellect of men. And when we go on, and I categorically reject when they say, evangelicals. I tell them, do you think I'm an evangelical? I get kicked out in 99% of evangelical gatherings, or they won't even deal with what the Oxford crew and all the people. I was once told by somebody, you'd be surprised who listens to you and Tom Horn, same general, when you guys go on the radio. And he said, I can tell you right now, because I have access to military computers. He said there are 45,000 federal computers in every intelligence agency. This isn't flattery, okay? And I'm only saying this, and when you get it from the horse's mouth, and, all I can say is good, but they have a fascination with when you and I talk about transhumanism, talk about giants, talk about the future, because even with their predictability, they say, we like to think we know everything, but we don't know everything. So when we hear things that obviously I believe God has put a time seal on to release, they pay attention. Just as an aside, it would be interesting to see how many computers are on this tonight. So I make no apologies
and
for
Steve, look, you and I know this because a few years ago we actually had a computer analyst who did a drill down after our show to find out exactly what was connected to the program, who was listening in, and we found that every single department of the U.S. government, including all of the departments of defense, they were all listening in on that program that night. Their computers leave a trail, and this analyst was able to trace back that trail. So we know that's true. Listen, ladies and gentlemen, I still want to try to cover some ground tonight, and I know we've only got about a half hour left. In order to understand why Steve and I are passionate about this and why we are now reaching, talk about the Omega Point. Forget Chardine. You're reaching Tom Horn, Steve Quayle Omega Point this year. This stuff is really coming to fruition. We are reaching some very critical phases. You absolutely have to get Steve's book, Xenogenesis. I would also say you got to get Steve's book, Genetic Armageddon. You've got to get Steve's book, The Gen 6 Giants, because all of this stuff was way ahead of everybody else. There's one other thing I would tell you to do. Steve, a moment ago, you said, people say, well, that's not even in the Bible. We should do a whole program someday on that one very subject. Really? It's not in the Bible? First of all, it's all through the Bible, and it's quoted by the disciples of the New Testament and the book of Genesis and the prophets of the Old Testament and so on. But in addition to that, we should do a whole show on how the books of the Bible were actually chosen. It's amazing. I don't know what people think. I don't know if people think that God 6,000 years ago came down and gave the King James Bible, which, by the way, is the Bible I prefer to read. It's the one I preach from, as you know. But it wasn't the King James Version of the Bible, ladies and gentlemen. God spoke in Hebrew, Arabic, later on in Quayle Greek. These were the languages that God spoke. And if you talk to anybody about inerrancy of Scripture, they're not talking about, there are 80 translations, or more than 80 translations of the Bible today. No scholar, none, zero, zippo, believe that any of those 80 translations are the inerrant Word of God, what they believe as the original letters that were originally delivered. That's the way the Apostle Paul talks about it in the book of Hebrews and in the book of Romans. The original letters, as God, who in sundry times and divers paths spoke unto the prophets, those were the original letters. Now, I think there are great translations that, preserve the meaning so that we're not ill-equipped today, so that we can rightly divide the word of truth and so on. I believe that. But people need to understand, and again, we got to do a whole show on this. How did the canon of the Scripture come together? Because a lot of people would be amazed to know this didn't happen overnight. It happened over a long period of time and a lot of different church councils deciding, how was the book written by a prophet of God? Was it confirmed by acts of God? They put together all these different rules. But guess what? The apocryphal books, the book of Enoch, the book of Jubilees, these books, these were very important to the early church. They were read and quoted by the disciples. And the arguments, by the way, by many early church fathers argued that the book of Enoch should be included among the canon of Scripture. But anyway, I don't want to get sidelined in all this. We got to do a whole show on that someday to talk about how all of this happened. But it was in the 1500s when, during the Protestant Reformation, it was Martin Luther who actually began arguing that the church should stop using the Apocrypha, because until then, so think about this, until 500 plus years ago, all of the books of the Bible as you know it today, plus the Apocrypha, were all carried around as the literature that guided the church. That's why in Qumran, at the Dead Sea Scrolls, you find fragments of the book of Enoch, Jubilees, and like that, the book of the giants. That's why you find those fragments, because these were all considered to be very, very important. And the church was trying to determine, okay, how do we separate what are the historical books of the Bible? So they're important, like the Maccabees and whatever. How do we separate that from the books that we would say were the inspired Word of God? So they put together a process of trying to determine, which book would. And by the way, the book of James almost didn't make it. Hebrews almost didn't make it. Several of the books that are in the canon almost didn't make it. Other books that almost did make it included Enoch, which is still part of the Roman Catholic Bible. And this is another thing, by the way, following the Protestant Reformation in the 1500s, the Catholic Church, as a result of what was happening with Martin Luther, had the Council of Trent. And at the Council of Trent, they determined that the Apocrypha would still be considered. This is true to this day. Lots of people don't know this. Still be considered Holy Scripture. And so it was only the Protestants that separated these other books. So anyway, there's a lot there. We need to get into this someday and talk about it, because most of what we know about the ancient watchers and what they did in creating their illegal, soulless, part-human monsters, the first hybrid age, comes to us from the apocryphal books like Enoch and Jubilees, which are reflected in Genesis, which are quoted by the apostles in the New Testament, were esteemed important to the early church, and so on. So for that reason, I'm telling people you've got to get Steve Quayle's books. But one other thing, I have made recently an extraordinary investment in producing a brand new Bible. It's called the Defender Bible, and it has the expanded Apocrypha, 18 other ancient books in the back in a separate section, like happened until 500 years ago in other Bibles, in the back of that Bible. For a very limited time, I'm giving that away free to Hagmann listeners and to others that visit skywatchtv.com. Click, you'll see the great big ad there on the top of the website. This is not a cheap. This Bible is costing me a ton to even have printed. It's a limited edition, collector's edition, bound in expensive simulated leather, silver embossed, red letter edition, 2,000 pages long. In a couple of months from now, we're going to retail it from between $80 to $125 per Bible.
Wow.
I'm going to give it away tonight. If you're listening to Hagmann, I put the ads up so this would be up ahead of Hagmann. Go to the website, skywatchtv.com, but I'm going to do something else. For Hagmann listeners only, if you click on the ad over there, we're calling that The Handmaiden's Conspiracy because we're giving all of this stuff away with the new book, The Handmaiden's Conspiracy. If you buy The Handmaiden's Conspiracy, you're going to get that Bible and some other books free. But if you, on checkout, type into the comments box, I heard you on Hagmann, and I'm also going to have them include the Inhuman documentary, a 2-time Telly Award-winning film that explains where transhumanism is leading and interviews some of the top transhumanists in the world, including Hugo de Garis, bioethicists, including members of the U.S. President's Council on Bioethics, top theologians from around the world. This is going to cost me a lot of money to do this. I want you to know I'm not making any money here. I'm losing money. But I want to do it because I believe so much that what Steve and I are doing here tonight, and what the Hagmanns do, by the way, when they invite us on their program, and I know they take criticism for it, but they do it anyway because they believe in what we're doing here and what we're talking about. I want to do all of this. You got to get Steve's books. Go over there to skywatchtv.com. Get this brand new, beautiful Bible that's got 18 ancient books that were read and quoted by the apostles of Jesus Christ. So if you don't think, okay, they're not part of the Bible, it doesn't matter. We separated them in this Bible. You have the full King James Version of the Bible, red letter edition, but in the back of it with actually an opening statement from me about why I included these, and it goes into a little bit of the history. And by the way, you don't attend a college or a seminary anywhere in the world that you don't have to study these books because they're important to the history of biblical chronology. But anyway, I know I kind of got off track, but you got me fired up, Steve. We got to do a show someday that explains to people how we wound up with the Bible that we have. And I got no problem, by the way, none, accepting the books of the Bible, the 27 books of the New Testament, the 39 books of the Old Testament. I got no problem accepting those as the inspired Word of God, but also understanding, as the early church did, as the apostles of Jesus did, who also quoted from these books, the importance of maintaining these ancient texts that shed light on the inspired word of the canon.
Well, I think that's critical. By the way, thank you for doing that, for giving people that. And, here's the deal. When Jesus said, "Lo, I come in the volume of the books written of me," and John says all the books all the books in the world couldn't contain everything Jesus had done. What really, how do I say this, frosts my cake, and we should talk about the baker's dozen, just meaning that there's so much in history, and we tie it all together because Tom Horn and my foundation are the Word of God, ladies and gentlemen. We're not preaching another gospel. I'm telling people that say, well, that stuff in the book of Enoch's another gospel. I said, that stuff is included in the gospel, and you don't even know what the gospel is, the good news, the redemption of mankind. And here's what I want to share this, Tom, because it's really important. We've been talking about the days of Noah, and I've had ignorant people, ignorant mouthpieces of the hell spawn say, well, this stuff doesn't even pertain to salvation. It certainly does. And I want to read one real quick thing. I think it's important. In again, chapter 13 in Xenogenesis, this is the thing I think is the most important point of the days of Noah that I've ever learned in 20 years, only to be, let's say, equaled by your statement to me however many years ago on the radio about the gates of hell when the Lord finally opened my eyes to that, okay? But here's what he said. This is from Mr. Langley, the dying CIA agent, just 2 paragraphs. He asked a friend of mine, whose name is Will, and Will B., if you listen to this, God bless you. You don't know how this has contributed to literally tens of thousands of people coming to Jesus over this question of the days of Noah. And this is what he was told, my friend Tom, Doug, and Joe, by the dying CIA guy. This is on page 219, starting in my book, Xenogenesis. They are trying to remove the Alpha and the Omega, he told me. He said that weather modification over Vietnam was a beginning. Some with secure and encrypted communications, some with weapons technology, and some were focused on experimental, rather dark and occult research. And he's talking about Operation Blazer. But here's what he said, and this is the 2 paragraphs. Think of a rainbow, all the colors flowing together like a river. Now envision a river, all of that power being channeled towards the sea. The river has a path and a direction, and it's held in check by the banks of the river. Imagine that the far bank is the Alpha and the near bank is the Omega. He's talking about the rainbow. If either bank is overcome, the result is chaos, a flood. So the Alpha and the Omega. The banks hold the power of the river in check. Now listen to this. Now imagine, he continued, that the colors of the rainbow are different frequencies of energy, all being held in check by the banks that are the Alpha and Omega frequencies. Life is orderly as long as these 2 frequencies are there and doing what they do. We don't often see rainbows, but God created the rainbow as a visible sign to us that he is in control of all the forces of nature and the spirit on this planet. We appreciate it when we see a rainbow. It's somehow a spiritual comfort to us all. And then he said, what they are working on, this is the Black Ops, is a way to remove the Alpha and the Omega, the banks that hold all of this in check, in other words, the equilibrium of God's creation. This will allow the intermingling of forces that are all now kept separate from one another, forces that were not intended to be together and operating on the same dimensional plane of existence. It will be the unleashing of chaos onto the earth. And I'll tell you what, if that doesn't give people goosebumps, it is the most profound and provocative thing that I know of, because who has seized the rainbow? Those who break down the very barriers of God's covenant of man and woman, Mary producing normal offspring. So everything is changing. The atmosphere is changing. We are genetically corrupted. We have ignorant sperm in the West. By ignorant sperm, that's my attempt at saying our sperm counts are so low, a kindergartner can do advanced math, okay? That's a Quayleism. But the point being is we are in a time period that Jesus said there's never been a time like it. So when you and I come on, Tom, together, and thank you, Doug and Joe, for letting us have this time, and when we're bringing together some of the smartest young people and I believe in the country, because I believe God's bringing them, the young people that work for Skywatch, the young people that work for Gen 6, Timothy Alberino gave one of the most beautiful presentations at Branson that I believe has ever been given. Everything that everybody's doing, and I will be announcing pretty soon, as soon as a couple things, my new book, and my new book is going to be, I would say this, it goes beyond the stars, but it also brings everything down to earth, because even QAnonymous is talking about the dead scientists. Ladies and gentlemen, all I can tell you is this, that this isn't the name of my book, but genetic total hell has been unleashed, and the very fabric of civilization has been torn. All the boundaries are loosed, and if somebody says, oh, that's so scary, there's no fear. Perfect love casts all fear, but Jesus said what destroys us, we're destroyed because we reject the warnings of his prophets, of his teachers, preachers, and everything. So, Tom, you know this. You and I are setting the stage for the next generation of spiritual warriors, gifted filmmakers, gifted authors, and those who will take up the charge. But, brother, we need God to move in that whole, if you will, assembly of the saints and make people fighting mad for the very, what would you say, the very existence of human beings. Because when Jesus said, when the Lord returns, will he find faith in the earth? And the point is, if there's no humans, there's no faith. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be shortened, or there'd be no flesh left alive. Until transhumanism, robotics, AI, singularity, the Borg, everything else that's been out there from Huxley, Julian Huxley forward, obviously, all of the forward-thinking people, you know, the point being is we're there now. And how? and I guess this is a rhetorical question, how outside of doing what you and I are doing, to provoke, to pray, to intercede, to write, to give away, you're like giving away an amazing work there. And ladies and gentlemen, I hope you hear what he's saying. He's going to give you a Bible that costs him big bucks, and Tom doesn't deal in the world of little bucks. Big bucks. And when you go producing something like that and you're going to give it away, Doug, that's really a nice offer. I hope people take Tom up on it. Go ahead, Tom. I think we got about
and again,
minutes.
we haven't decided yet, but because of just what it costs us to even produce it, I'm spending hundreds of thousands of dollars to give this away, to give you an idea.
And I want people to know that.
I'm doing it because I believe in what's leading up to our conference. I'm doing it, Steve, because I believe in the research you're doing. And by the way, I've seen the secret, private covers for your books and some of the images that are inside the new, oh my gosh. I think it's the biggest thing you've ever done before. I'm very excited about it. I'm hoping it's going to be done before we hit the conference this year.
It will. It will.
I've got, there's maybe 10 minutes left here, and I don't want to leave people hanging on this one comment I made earlier before I went off on my big discussion about the history of the Bible. And I still, by the way, believe that at some point you and I should do a program on that. But I was talking about Craig Venter's breakthrough, how he was the guy, he originated genetic sequencing, DNA sequencing created in the mind of a computer. So he was the first guy who did this 2016. Stuff has advanced very quickly since then. And where does that bring us today? Well, there's a much bigger question now, and I'm going to be dealing with this at the conference about how human-robot couples could produce human-robot offspring using robot-generated DNA sequencing implanted into a human mother or other human biological matter, such as sperm and eggs from skin cells that we talked about earlier. And I know it sounds, well, first of all, it kind of sounds complicated, but amazingly, it really isn't. And it also sounds too sci-fi to be true, and it totally isn't. There's a new technology, Google this and read about it, called tissue nanotransfection, or TNT. TNT, right? We're going to all blow ourselves up. TNT for short. And you can read about TNT technology, how researchers at Ohio State College of Engineering and the Ohio State University Wexner Medical Center, they developed this technology. And really it was developed just as a way to repair or restore injured or aging tissue, including blood vessels, nerve cells, and even entire organs, like in soldiers who were damaged and whatever. But it started out that way. It's a nanochip technology for repairing injured, aged body tissues. But now it's the primary vehicle that's going to make the transference of robotic DNA information into human tissue possible. So what am I saying? I'm saying that when we reach strong artificial intelligence, artificial entities that have become conscious will be able to write genetic sequencing. They'll be able to create the DNA of a robot, if you will, for their desired offspring. That will then be injected, delivered by TNT, that will hold both human and robotic genetically designed codes. The offspring resulting will, from a successful full gestational term, would quite literally be half human, half robot DNA. Now, again, another one to read. So, I'm not making this stuff up. Dr. Chandan Sen, S-E-N, he's the director of Ohio State Center for Regenerative Medicine, cell-based therapies. He's one of the most intelligent biologists in the world. He was interviewed just a couple of months ago. He explained it this way. I'm going to read his quote real quick because I know I'm running out of time. Here's what he says, Steve. Suddenly, the very real possibility has appeared on the horizon of the robots of the future manipulating human skin cells to create human sperm and human eggs, and from them, using the Ohio discovery of TNT as the basis, creating an entire human robot baby whose embryo can be nurtured and carried through pregnancy by a mother surrogate. By injecting genetic code into skin cells a la TNT, the Ohio researchers have paved the way for the genetic code of a robot containing some of the characteristics that the robot desires to be passed on to its offspring along with human genetic code. This is how I believe it will be, I'm still quoting, this is how I believe it will be possible within the very foreseeable future for humans and robots to make babies together, end quote. So it doesn't mean the resulting baby is going to be born with wire and steel joints. It does mean that in the very near future, we're talking about right now, essentially, a man would be able to provide his DNA to a laboratory, purchase a robot, one of these sex robots, pay an expert programmer to give her the looks and personality that he wants, have her looks and personality translated into genetic coding for implantation, designer baby stuff, right, into biological matter, let the laboratory or a surrogate mother grow the couple's baby. Then he can take his child and his AI partner home and become this adorable little family of one human, one robot, and one what? W-H-A-T question mark. This is the question. This is the question that Tom Horn, Steve Quayle, are being lampooned by the University of London and peer-reviewed science and religious journals on right now, because we dare to ask one what. What is this? It's a soulless what? Child of the gods, according to antiquity, guided by what? A synthetic spirit, a living entity possessed by a ghost in the machine? I mean, this is Revelation chapter 13, describing the first fruits of all that is going to be born after the arrival of Antichrist, not in God's image, but in Antichrist's image. Let me see, I got a couple more minutes. Another thing you said a moment ago, Steve, that fired me up, and I'm writing down little notes as you're talking, and it's a very important point, and that is biblical language as regards image-bearing for both God and the anti-God are actually the same language. God made man in his image, Hebrew, Tselem. He breathed the breath of life into him, and man became God's image bearer and a living soul. But Antichrist is also going to have an image. It's the Greek akon, and into it, life is going to be breathed, according to the book of Revelation. The Hebrew and the Greek words translated image in regard to both of these references, in generic terms, it just means a likeness, a statue, representation, resemblance. But Antichrist's image bearer is biblically described as being more than a sculpture, a simulacrum, in the same way that mankind is also described as being more than a statue or a simulacrum of God. And Revelation 13 confirms that life, L-I-F-E, pneuma, the ancient Greek word for breath, spirit, soul, is going to enter the image bearer of the beast. But the animating power source, what is this? Is this the technological singularity, this animating power source that gives life to the beast's imager, is actually foreign in the language to the breath that God blew into Adam. This is anti-breath. This is anti-human offspring of Antichrist. And it really does harken back to the science employed by watchers when Nephilim became fit extensions for non-human unclean spirits housed in these unredeemable giant clans. It signifies, ladies and gentlemen, our nearness to the fulfillment of Matthew 24:37, as it was in the days of Noah. It signifies the image of the beast is very, very, very close. It signifies the importance of why Steve Quayle and Gen 6 in association with, actually we are in association, Skywatch TV is in association with them, it's their conference, why we are supporting what they are doing, because the timeliness of this is dangerous now.
And Tom, speaking of Skywatch, we got an email from a lady named Nancy, and she says that the code for the Tom Horn books does not work. So can you?
There is no code. If you go, if you just go to skywatchtv.com, if she's wanting the free Bible, go to skywatchtv.com click on the big ad right there on the top of the website. It'll take you into the Skywatch TV store.com. And all you got to do on checkout, there's a comments section on checkout. Just type in, I heard you on Hagmann. You're going to get the free Bible and those other books that are free that are advertised in the ad anyway. But in addition to that, Hagmann listeners only, that type in, I heard you on Hagmann, you're also going to receive the 2-time Telly Award-winning documentary film, Inhuman, that features people like Hugo de Garis and other people that are going to be at the conference this year. And you'll learn why. You've got the highest level universities in the world now saying Tom Horn and Steve Quayle are a force to be reckoned with. And they don't mean that, by the way, in a positive way. They mean they're very concerned that they can't push their agenda forward unless people deal with the questions that we are raising. I don't care, and by the way, I agree with Steve Quayle, what Steve said earlier. It's the highest praise ever. Thank you very much. I'm glad that they recognize this. I just wish that the evangelical and Protestant churches would. We've got some churches out there that buy Steve's book. They use them as curriculum in their Sunday schools, and I'm thankful for that. They've used some of the stuff I've written in the same way. But ladies and gentlemen, we desperately right now need an awakening. If you're an evangelical, if you're a Protestant, if there's anything you can do to wake up your neighbors, help them. Pay for their registration to come to this conference. Last year at the Steve Quayle conference in Branson, I had said that was going to be the last conference I was ever going to speak at. And I meant it, too, by the way. I was fully committed to I'm not speaking at any more conferences. But following that conference, and so many young people coming up talking about how our ministry had basically brought them back to Jesus Christ. So many parents coming up saying, you can't believe what your ministry means to my 16-year-old teenage daughter or my 18-year-old teenage daughter. That meant so much to me to realize that, okay, we haven't sown in vain. We are finally starting to reach a new generation. And little by little, people are waking up to this reality is what made me want to come back. So if you're listening to this broadcast tonight, I know that I'm meandering here. Talk to your neighbors, talk to your friends, talk to your family. Get them to this conference. I'm not being paid one penny to pitch this conference. The only thing I got in this conference is I got to go to work.
And ladies and gentlemen, please, please, ladies and gentlemen, register because, again, I'm sorry. One guy got mad, Tom, and threatened to show up and disrupt it because we didn't have a bigger auditorium in a venue. Well, we don't have that access, and the mansion is so good because of all the lighting, the sound, and goes on and on. So please, ladies and gentlemen, again, if you're going to come, please register and then get your hotel because this thing is already, it's all over the country. The people that are even buying the DVDs from the first conference are just ecstatic. So go to gen6.com/conference and buy your ticket.
Thank you both.
And that's the other thing, Steve. People should, if they have any questions, talk to the people who were there last year. We didn't have anything but the highest praise, best conference we ever went to, people were saying, and we've heard that all year long. And a lot of the people that were there are coming back to this one, too, because they loved it so much.